Critical theorists, in the critical perspective, focus on patterns of domination and oppression in the organization. They focus on patterns of social inequality, alienation, and the internal class conflict. Who are the marginalized groups? The work conditions that are hazardous to employee health and welfare, and the employee mental health problems. The major theme is that organizations are instruments of domination. Two kinds of theories: organizations as multiple oppressions or oppressors, and non-hierarchical organizations. In the contemporary era, when we look at the organizations as multiple oppressions, the main idea is that organizations exclude and discriminate against multiple groups, and we need to examine who these multiple groups are. And frequently, they include women, younger and older people, persons with disabilities, persons of color, sexual minorities, those of lower economic class. The most marginalized of these people are usually those with disabilities. When we look at the non-hierarchical organizations within the critical theory, here it points out that hierarchical organizational structures lead to alienation and internal class conflict, and directly challenge rationalist theory views that hierarchy is needed to maximize inefficiency. So what happens is that many or some non-hierarchical organizations operate from a modified consensual model that appears to work best if the organization features a strong shared ideology and culture with clear goals developed through consensus process, and the staff and its members recognizing that are recognized by ability rather than rank. Okay, so the consensus piece is very important, and it has to be effective, and it has to be working where you do have shared values and a clear understanding of goals, in this particular process. What are the considerations that we need to think about with respect to these four different perspectives? And that is that we need to understand that each theoretical perspective tells us something different about the organization in terms of what it is that we're looking at. All right? The rational perspective is very goal-oriented. The systems perspective defines the interrelationships within the different subsystems. All right? And the interpretive perspective looks at multiple differences within the organization, and the critical perspective looks at oppression. Each of these perspectives have their strengths and weaknesses. Each of them have their good points, and each of them have their negative points. Based on your choice of perspectives as a future manager, it has implications to practice. It has implications in terms of how you will lead and how you will work with that organization. We spent time talking about this because this also has implications in terms of how you will go about with the different types of leadership theories for you as a manager and as an administrator in the educational and training process, in terms of what you may emphasize and how you view individuals as you work with staff, as an administrator and as a manager. And this is in large part why we spent some considerable time in just overviewing or looking at these key points. All right, and I think it'll become clear as we move forward in weeks 2 and 3. Understanding and looking at burnout is very important for future administrators and managers. Burnout is defined as a prolonged response to chronic emotional and interpersonal stressors on the job. It has 3 dimensions: exhaustion, cynicism, and inefficiency. Burnout has been studied by many, and it gives a voice to individuals who are dominated or exploited in organizations. You need to be able to understand burnout and understand that oftentimes we may be pushing people too much, or we may be asking them to do too much or work too hard. And as part of our educational responsibilities that we will focus on much more clearly next week, is that we need to understand and be able to identify the results of burnout and the symptoms of burnout, which include exhaustion, cynicism, and inefficiency, and what happens when we overwork, overload, have inadequate control of our resources needed to do the job, or we lack the social and financial rewards for good work and the ethical concerns of values and discrepancies. It influences how we can motivate staff to do better work. And it is for this reason that understanding organizational burnout and looking at it very clearly is very, very important, and why I use this reading as an introduction to the real core of where we want to be as the administrator, as an educator. The other important piece that's discussed is the responsibility to lead. Every manager, every supervisor, every administrator carries a leadership responsibility in the organization where they work. I often tell students in my classes in Cleveland, if you think direct service is easy, trying to get a client from point A to B, imagine yourself having to move a community from point A to B from a large systems perspective. Imagine having to move a unit from point A to B, a division, or even an agency. What is leadership? It's an attitude about responsibility in an organization based on professional skills and a set of values that compel an individual to act. And there are different kinds of leaders. And there's a lot of theory on different types of management theory on leadership, right, that we need to become aware of. And that does influence us in terms of our primary responsibility as managers and supervisors in the educational process. Administrators and managers as leaders must act as assigned leaders in organizational positions that carry them from formal authority and leaders with personal authority that is recognized and by others regardless of a position. We will talk about that, and you will see that come very clearly as it relates to your authority and power that you have as a supervisor if you were to read all of Kadushin and Harkness's texts sometime in the future.